Hi, and welcome to the Long-Reining webinar. Now, we're on Tuesday instead of Monday today, so I think that's thrown a few of you. So if you're watching the replay here, welcome to the replay. Today we are talking about long-reining, and I want to discuss, first of all, the difference between long-reining and lunging and why we might use long-reining over lunging. What are the advantages to long-reining over lunging? Why people lunge or long-rein their horse, and all of those different things. There's no doubt that lunging is much more popular and done much more frequently than long-reining. Long-reining is unfortunately a bit of a dying art, and I think that's a real shame for the horse and for you as a rider and trainer, because you can get a lot out of long-reining that you can't get close to with lunging. And so I want to start off by discussing that. So let's have a little bit of a look at the difference between the two things. I just want to say, first of all, that I recently wrote a review article. So a review article is basically looking at all the literature that's already available and discussing that and seeing, what we need to do, where we need to go from here, and what we don't know, working out what we don't know. And in that, the article was called Cutting to the Chase, and we were looking at lunging, round penning, and high-speed liberty work and seeing how those three things can risk horse welfare. And I think the biggest risk there with those three things is the chasing the horse. And that's really the difference between lunging and long-reining, or round penning and long-reining, is that you're really not going to be chasing the horse. So hello, we have the Americans here. Hello. How lovely. So, it's very important. It's a really important distinction, because the problem with chasing the horse is that we're getting the horse to use its flight instinct. So it's running from fear. Now, whether that's because of the whip, we're chasing it in the round pen, or we've got a lariat or something, but whatever the horse practices, it's likely to repeat. So if let's say we have the horse on a long lunge line, and we've got that attached to its head collar or its bridle, and we're just running off a bit of energy. And that seems to be the reason most people use lunging or round penning before they ride, is to just run off a little bit of that energy. The horse might be a bit fresh, have a bit of a buck. So get the horse to do that, then get on when it's safer and it's a little bit tired. Now, there's masses of problems with that, right? Because first of all, you're getting the horse to practice something you never want it to do under saddle. So you never want the horse to run away from an aid like a whip. Never. You never want the horse to run uncontrolled. You never want the horse to buck, which you can easily do if it's in the round pen alone or if it's on a single lunge line. And you never want the horse to do any of these things, or to go with its head in the air. So, if it's just in the round pen by itself or on a single lunge line, quite often the horse got a really high head and a hollow back and it's running. This is a posture you never want to see your horse in. So the thing is, don't practice it, because whatever you practice, the horse will repeat, and the horse will repeat that under saddle. So let's say, you get the horse into this pattern. Horses are great pattern learners. So let's say they get into this pattern of going around, and it's quite a common thing to do, put the horse on a 12-foot line or something. And I see this quite a lot, people warming their horse up like this before they get on, has a bit of a cant around this way and a cant around that way, and a bit of a buck and a bit of a rear and, a bit of a carry on. And then the horse a little bit tired, got that out of its system, and off the rider goes, gets on, and off they go. What happens when you can't do that? What happens when you have a day where you can't run the horse around? Or let's say the horse has been injured. So you really want to ride, but you can only go walk. And you can't let the horse, run around in these tiny circles. The horse has already established a pattern. And the first thing it does when, you work it is it runs around these crazy little circles. So when you get on, if the horse runs around in crazy little circles and bucks, then that's because you've taught it to do that. The horse doesn't know the difference, so you're on it or you're not on it. It makes no difference to the horse. If that's a pattern it's learned, that's the pattern it will continue to do. So it's a really bad idea, I think, to introduce anything any behavior, to practice any behavior that we don't want the horse to do under saddle. So if you want the horse to run away from the whip, then chase the horse in the round pen and you'll establish that pattern really well. But expect it to happen when you ride and you use the whip, even if it's a different sort of whip. Expect the horse to have that as a possible response, because if we remember, the way reinforcement works, what we're doing with negative reinforcement, so for example, using the whip to encourage the horse to move forward when the horse stops, when the horse does move forward, we release that pressure of the whip. So you don't have to touch the horse with the whip, you might just raise the whip. That would make the horse go forward, so you lower the whip again. And, the horse has learned from negative reinforcement. You've removed the whip. So if that pattern of negative reinforcement, your horse has learned to run from that, then when you're riding, the horse might do the same thing, because the horse is just going to develop a shopping list of possible responses to your cue. So your cue is the whip there, possible response is run. You might not want that as a possible response. You might want move faster, move your feet faster, something like that, something a little bit more controlled, rather than a sort of flight instinct, go, which is what's going to happen if you chase the horse. So it comes back really to being careful about what you teach. And, I talk a couple of times, I've taught 2 horses to rear on command. It's a really stupid thing to teach, and don't teach it. It's fun, but it is really silly. The first one I did in Colorado, because Josh Lyons' horse reared, and it reared about this high off the ground. So I thought, I'm going to teach my horse. It took me 45 minutes to get this little polo penny to rear, but she was rearing really high. So what I'd done was I'd introduced rearing as a possible response. And so whenever I was on her and anywhere near Josh would cue her to rear. She'd rear. But it also came up as a possible response whenever I taught anything new. So if I taught something new and the horse was, thinking about that and working out what foot I wanted to move where, she'd say, oh, maybe it's rear, maybe it's rear. And good for her. You've got to trial. They trial new behaviors when you teach something new. So any behavior you've taught, that will come up as something they'll trial later. And, it really is important that you be careful about what you teach, because if they're going to trial rearing, for example, or running off uncontrolled or bucking, then, you don't want them doing that under saddle, but they're perfectly entitled to do that, and they're likely to do that if you have taught that, even unwittingly, in a pattern that you've been teaching. So looking again back to the differences between lunging and long reining, because the horse is working in that round posture, it's much more difficult for the horse to buck or to carry on like that. So it's a much more controlled exercise. Long reining is a much more controlled exercise than lunging, and much more controlled than round penning. Is it more difficult to teach? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It does take you a little longer to teach, but you're getting all sorts of other things as well. So let's have a look at, at how the horse looks, the posture of the horse in long reining. You've got a round horse, its back is up, its hindquarters are underneath it, it's soft in the bridle. And you know this because you can feel it, because you've got one rein in each hand. And you can see the horse, you can see how the horse is moving. So you're practicing all those things like give to the bit that you taught the horse earlier, because you've got to teach give to the bit before you can teach long reining, obviously. And you're building the top line of the horse. So I long rein all of my horses, and I do so as soon as they're old enough to learn give to the bit. It's the first thing I do. And the reason I do that long before I ever ride them is because I want them to have built those top line muscles before I get on. Because if you take a horse, drag a horse out of the paddock and take it through the breaking process, usually when a horse goes to a breakers, they go for about 6 weeks. So within the first or second week, somebody's riding that horse. Now, if the horse has been standing in the paddock for the last 4 years, then it hasn't got any top line muscle. And it's ridiculous to assume it can build top line muscle in a week or two. So it can't. But if since the horse was a 2-year-old or something, you've been long reining that horse. You've been building those muscles. You've been building all those muscles that it needs to have the correct posture when it does finally come under saddle. So when you put the saddle on, you're not going to have all those problems with it not fitting properly and having to, change it all the time when the horse develops his top line over time, because the horse should already have a rather stable top line development by then. And it'll have the muscles, the abdominal muscles and the top line muscles, to be able to carry you much more easily, which means you're much less likely to cause the horse any pain or discomfort during that starting process. Especially also, we've talked before about with these horses, these educationally young horses, we need to break lessons down so they just get really short rides. I know that when I first start horses, if I'm, the first few rides are a minute long, 2 minutes long, and it just comes at the end of the lesson after you've done the long lining, you've done the in-hand work, the shoulder work. You get on the horse, you have a little walk around, change direction a few times, and then get off. And the riding becomes the bit at the end. It's really easy, really nice, and the horse looks forward to that. Hello from Vancouver Island. How lovely. No problem being late. Everybody's a bit late because we're on Tuesday instead of Monday, so I've confused everybody. Never mind. All right, so let's just talk a little bit about the other benefits that you get with long reining that you don't get with lunging. So one of them is that you habituate your horse a lot more to the ropes. Now, I always teach long reining with one rope going behind the horse's hock. And I'll discuss that later, why I do this. It's an easy way to teach it, but it's a less advanced thing. So when the horse gets more advanced, you really do want the reins coming from sort of the wither, which is much more like the rein angle that you'll have when you're riding. But to teach it, to have the rope around the back of the horse is really helpful. Oh my God, it's snowing there. So I'm just reading the comments. It's snowing, really. Oh. It's about 27 here, rather beautiful. But anyway, I'll stop making you jealous. So having the rope around the back of the horse is good because a lot of horses have already learned to lunge or round pen. And if they turn and face you, it's very hard to get them going again, and it makes it much more likely that they can spin around and get themselves tangled in the rope, which is really bad. So by having the rope around the back of the horse, it means it's very hard for the horse to turn and face you. So it's partly a benefit for the handler, because long reining, when you watch the videos, it looks like really easy. And I remember the first time I did it, which was back in last century. And I remember watching someone thinking, oh, that's easy, I can do that. You get both the reins, it's like, oh my God, there were 2 ropes and the whip. I'm like, the horse is everywhere. It was terrible. So do expect to feel really uncoordinated the first few times you do it. But just, be kind to yourself. And the thing to do is to change direction a lot. So you've got those 2 ropes and you can really be driving your horse. And by driving the horse, you're much more behind the horse. So we'll go into this a bit later when I take you into the training and just walk you through. But changing direction will help you stop the horse from turning and facing you. The other really big advantage, so there you've got the advantage of habituating the horse to having the ropes around its legs, which is very useful. The other really big advantage, apart from building the top line, as we've discussed, is that the horse is learning self-carriage. So a lot of people say to me, well, I lunge my horse in side rein. So, you talk about long reining and the horse is in the correct posture and the horse is soft in the bridle and it's, got its back up and its hind quarter underneath it. But, I lunge in side rein, so it's the same thing. The horse is in the same posture. The problem with side reins is that the horse could be leaning on the side reins, or it might be pulled into posture. So you don't know, because you don't have any contact with those reins. You don't know what the horse is experiencing with the side reins. Also, they're not adjustable. Like, you can't just move your hand forward and release the side rein. and you can't shorten the side rein up by moving your hand closer to you. So if you want to change anything about side reins, you have to stop the horse and readjust the side rein. So they're a very blunt tool. And what is likely to happen with anything that you use that ties the horse's head into a certain position, even if it's your hands holding onto it, when that is released, the head is likely to go higher. And it's just, it happens all the time. You see it with, dressage schoolmasters that are used to being held the whole time they're in motion. And when you let them go, the head just goes up like this. And the horse goes, oh, thank God, they've got no pressure anymore. So that's the opposite of self-carriage. So we're trying to teach you self-carriage, which is you can release the pressure when the horse is correct. And you don't need to pick it up again until the horse makes a mistake. So we're teaching self-carriage, and that can't be done with side reins. You simply don't have the control. So with the side reins, if the horse comes up and is in self-carriage, you've no way to release that. And, as I said, you don't know whether the horse is leaning on it. And what's most likely to happen is you remove the side reins and the horse's head goes up. The other thing that happens a lot with side reins is the horse tucks back behind the vertical to get away from the pressure, which is another posture you really don't want to teach the horse. So the other thing I really like about it is that, especially teaching it with the rope behind, because I usually teach it in a saddle. So not initially, obviously, because I teach very young horses that haven't been saddled yet. So when I teach long reining, it's the first time they've had a girth. And I teach it with a surcingle. But with the older horses, I pop the saddle on and I use the saddle instead. So I just tie the stirrups together underneath the horse, usually with a nice soft bungee rope or something. And I slide the reins through the stirrups and to the bit. Now, when you do it like that, the reins are quite low, but we're just training, so we don't worry too much about that. The big advantage I find teaching it with the saddle on is the fact that you can see the horse, you can feel the horse, and you can say, is that horse ready to ride? Now, if my answer to that is yes, maybe I'm just lazier than most people, but I'm much more likely, if the horse is already saddled, to say, oh, great, I'll jump on and have a ride, even if it's just a 5-minute ride. If I have to take the horse back to the stable and take the surcingle off and put the saddle on and do all of that, then I'm much more likely to say, oh, I'll do that tomorrow, I'll do that next week or next time. So for me, it's that being able to see it and think, oh, yeah, I can ride that. I'll just do that quickly. And I'm much more likely to get on and have a really great, 5-minute ride. And that's all it will take. So I think that's a really important aspect of a really important advantage of long reining over lunging. The other thing about that is that it's a really good test of whether your horse is ready to ride or not. So I use long reining a lot when I'm starting a horse. And I was telling this story, I think, yesterday on Facebook Live. I had somebody recently come to me, and I get this a lot, actually. I've done all the hard work. I've done all the hard work, and it's just the horse is ready for its first ride. So I brought it to you. It's obviously, I look like a crash test dummy or something. And I'm like, oh, you know what? If you've done all the hard work and you're not desperate to have the first ride, something's wrong. And you should be looking at that horse saying, oh, I really want to get on. If you don't feel that, then you've got one or probably many big holes in your training. So for me, long reining is that test. So you can take the horse and you can long rein it in an arena or an open field. And if you have directional control, if you have acceleration and deceleration, and if you have good transitions, so you want your horse to be able to walk, trot, canter, go between those gaits, stay relaxed, maintain posture and self-carriage the whole time through the transitions and everything else before you get on. Because it's no good finding out that you haven't got stop, or you haven't got downwards transitions, or you haven't got turn left when you're on. Yeah? You want to know all of this before you get on. And obviously, you've done the mounting and the first saddling and all of those. You've done all that. So now it's just a matter of, throwing your leg over and taking your first few steps. Now, you don't want to do that with your fingers crossed. You want to do that knowing what that horse has in his toolbox. What are the responses that horse has that it might offer me when I get on? And if you've long-reined rather than lunged, you will have a much better idea, and those possible responses are going to be ones that you're much more likely to want to ride. So I look at the horse on the long reins, before its first ride, and I ask myself two questions. One, can I ride that? And if a horse barks, I can't ride a bark. So I know the answer then is no. I don't care if it pig roots or kicks or whatever it is. No, I'm not going to ride that. I'm never going to get on a horse that does anything like that. So because the horse is not relaxed, then the horse is showing, bucking or kicking out is a conflict behavior. So the horse has some conflict going on, and I don't consider myself a good enough rider to want to ride that. And I also don't think that, you should be trying to ride through something. I want to educate my horse. I don't want my horse to be scared and tired and therefore not bark. I want my horse to understand the training. And can you canter on the long lines as a question just come up? Yeah, absolutely. Canter, a lot of people have trouble with the canter. And one of the reasons is that it's just not very well established gait. And the long lines is a fabulous place to establish the canter, because you can allow the horse to build up that balance and muscle and everything that it needs to canter in self-carriage and be light in the bridle and use its hindquarter, get its hindquarter underneath it. All of that without it having to carry you around. And it just means that the horse is going to go into that gait much more relaxed. It's also somewhere that you can teach those verbal transitions. So I have a kiss cue for canter sound, whereas I have clucks for trot. And I established this very early on. So when I do come to ride and that horse hears that kiss cue, it knows immediately, oh, that's canter. And I don't have all that, fast trotting. Maybe it's if I'm just clucking, maybe the horse thinks me go faster, because you can establish that on the lines really early on. And it's very important, I always think, that your horse has walk, trot, and canter well established before you ride it. It doesn't mean that you want to ride the canter in the first week that you ride the horse, but the canter is a much more emotional gait. So your horse in canter is going to be more emotional than it is in trot. Now your horse is going to be more emotional when you're on it than it is when you're not for the first few rides, right? So you want to see what happens when you raise that emotional level. And a good way to do that is to increase speed. So yeah, it's very important that your horse has walk, trot, and canter before you get on. So it's back to the questions that I asked myself here. The first one is, can I ride it? If the horse bucks or kicks, no, I can't, so I'm not interested. So it's not time yet. The other question is, which is probably more important, do I want to? And that's a sort of funny sort of question, because what you'll find when you start training your own horse like this, and if let's say, you take your horse, let's say you've already got a horse under saddle, and you decide, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take it right back to basics, and I'm going to work through the can-do material from start to finish, and I'm going to see the change in my horse. And even I do that quite a lot, take a horse right back to basics, and it doesn't take very long. And I am amazed. And I get to this stage where my question is, do I want to ride that? And quite often, I am so desperate to ride that I won't even let myself do it that day. I say, okay, I really want to ride that, but I'll do it tomorrow. And that's the feeling you want before you get on. And I think it's really important. It's a really important question to ask yourself, because I know that, certainly when I was younger, there's it's a sort of macho thing, isn't it? Oh yeah, that horse is crazy, I'll ride that one, No, it's not fair on you as a rider. It's really not fair on the horse though either, because any horse that's behaving like that is a very conflicted horse, is a really anxious horse. And being scared is a horrible place to be. And it doesn't matter whether you're a horse or a person. Being scared is a horrible place to be. So the more we can do to relieve that horse's anxiety, the better. And the long reins is a great place to do it, because I think that it doesn't really matter to the horse whether we're riding or not. What matters to the horse is, its transitions, its way of going, its posture, self-carriage, all of those things matter to the horse. The horse habituates to having us sitting on its back. But what's important is that it has these really good patterns set up that it can follow when we're riding. So the patterns are set up with the groundwork. The patterns are set up long-reining. No, the question is, so I'm running along behind her when she canters, from Susan here. You're sort of confusing driving and long-reining a little bit. And when in a minute I'll come into the training and we'll look at the difference between the two. With driving, you're behind the horse. With long-reining, you're often, it depends on how you use the word, but I use long-reining more like lunging. So it looks more like lunging. So the horse is going around me in a circle. Now, that's another really useful thing for long-reining. Yes, that's exactly right. Long-reining in scary areas might work. Yeah. Now, look, I use long-reining to ride everything before I ride it. So, if I can long-rein them in the round pen before I ride them, that's great. If I can long-rein them in the arena before I ride them, that's great. Trail riding, brilliant. I long-rein all my horses all around the fields that where I'm going to trail ride them. The worst thing that can happen is that the horse can, get scared and can run home with the reins dragging behind it. And because I've already taught the horse how to long rein, I've habituated the horse to having the ropes dragging behind it, that's not going to be a problem for it. But it's much better than the horse getting scared, spinning around, throwing me on the floor, and then galloping home without me. So yes, absolutely. Long reining is great for that sort of thing. It's great for, and that really is driving then, you are going behind the horse. So what I do in the fields here is I'll take the horse out to an open area in the field. So drive just behind it, walking, and then get to an open area. And I'll do trot and canter circles around there, and then we'll drive over somewhere else and we'll do circles, and then we'll come back. And that's the way I like to do it. And it works very well, really good to habituate the horse to new areas. So it's also great if you have like a barn sour horse. So the horse that doesn't want to leave the stable or leave its friends. So what you can do then, is much safer than riding the horse, is to long rein it and move further and further and further away from its friends or the barn or whatever it is that it's being attached to. So, I'll do that here. I've got the horses are all in a herd and a paddock together. So I can start working the horse really close to those horses where it's really comfortable, and then just slowly move away. You go further and further away until before you know it, in the next field. Of course, the horse is in the engagement zone bubble. It's in our bubble of communication, just like it will be when I'm riding. And so it's hardly even thought of this. The horse is concentrating on what I'm asking it to do. We're moving up and down in the transitions. And so it's just like riding like that. And it's exactly the same approach as I take with a barn sour horse under saddle. It's just a bit safer on the long lines because I'm not actually on the horse. So, you're still building that bubble of communication. And that, I think, is the most important thing about long reining, and why it's so advantageous is because you're building that bubble of communication. It's just a bit bigger, because if you can imagine, when you're riding the horse, the bubble surrounds you and the horse. When you're long reining the horse, the bubble has to spread, between you and the horse, which can be sort of 10 meters, right? So it actually really helps make that bubble solid for you, because you do have to introduce that distance. So your bubble is stronger. By the time you get on the horse, your bubble is stronger. So that's really, really important. The other thing I love about it is that you can really concentrate on transitions. And a lot of people, have horses that run into canter, or, you know, horses that don't walk when they're asked to walk, you know, horses that are too forward or not forward enough. And by taking the weight off the horse, it just simplifies it all for the horse. So I like to get my horse to respond to the lightest of pressure cues. And for me, that's a voice cue. So I'll use that first. So we go back to the canter. My first cue for canter is a kiss sound, even when I'm on the horse. So I'll kiss, and then if the horse doesn't canter, I'll raise the whip. And if I'm on the ground, that's the lunge whip. And then if the horse still doesn't canter, I'll flick the whip around. And I'll keep doing that. I'll keep kissing. I'll keep flicking the whip until the horse canters. And then I stop all the cues. And I let the horse make the mistake of coming back to trot before I cue it again. And that's quite an important point that we might discuss later. But allowing the horse to make that mistake, because we can all see when the horse is going to fall out of canter, right? So if a horse is still cantering, you know, perhaps it goes to 4B canter and we think, oh, it's going to trot in a minute. If we pluck it up then, what happens is we're training the horse to rely on us to maintain speed. So the horse then will fall out of canter all the time because it's going to expect us to keep it in canter. So it's quite important that we let it make the mistake, then we start cueing it again. The horse doesn't want to be cued, so the horse learns self-carriage. The horse learns to maintain the gait itself. So I am now going to take you inside the training. I'll work out this. Whoops. And we're just going to have a look at the long-reining inside the training. Here we go. That's it, I think. Yep. Right. So here we are on the first page. Here you'll notice that I have removed the membership is currently closed. If you're not a member yet, we will be reopening at some stage quite soon. So watch out for the training that's coming up, because I'm quite excited about the new changes. So into horse training course, of course. And here's your main page. We're looking for long-reining. Here it is here. Now, as with all the foundation lessons, you will find, first of all, there's the full-length lesson. Now, this is just, it's basically a DVD, but you can watch the whole thing right here on inside the training. So after you've done that, and I would watch that first because it's quite important to get that sort of overview. And then we get into the basic lesson. So the habituation lesson here we're looking at how to habituate the horse, how to get the horse used to the ropes. And it's very important that, you know, because you're going to tie a rope to the horse for long reining, and you really don't want the horse being scared of ropes. So this actually has some other advantages as well. You know, it's really good to get the horse used to having things around its hocks like this. And this little horse that I use as an example here, he's a great example because he was very nervous about these ropes. And so it's interesting to see how he does and how I have to break it down for this horse. And the reason he was so nervous about it is because he had a nasty accident as a youngster with ropes around his legs. So he was a great example, and you can see how unhappy he is when his back comes up. And I really do have to break it down. So that's a particularly useful lesson for those of you that, you know, have a bit of trouble with horses with habituation. Now, the next one here is on changing direction. And this is really important because somebody wrote to me yesterday and they said, oh, you know, my horse keeps turning and facing me. And that will happen if you get in front of the drive line. Now, the drive line is the girth, really. So you can see here this mare, this is her first time long reining, and she's, you know, trying to do all sorts of things to get away from the pressure, which is fair enough. She's putting head down. She's, you know, she's trying all sorts of things. She'll get it eventually. But one of the things she really wanted to do, because she'd been lunged a lot, was to turn and face me. So I'm being careful to stay behind her. And what I tell you here is that when you change direction, look at the horse's tail. Okay, because if you look at the horse's tail, see there again, she wanted to turn and face me. If you look at the horse's tail, it keeps you behind that drive line. So that's quite important, and it's quite a useful thing to do, because especially when you have a horse that's already got well-established patterns like this horse did, you know, she's well established at turn and face. She'd been lunged a lot, you know, and it does mean that they've got really good set in stone sort of habits, which you have to overcome early on, because, you know, the horse can get wrapped around in the reins really easily, and that can be very ugly. So then we go right towards performance. So this is, you know, really, once you've got the basics established, you've got the horse changing direction, now we want to start, you know, looking at that quality of the gait. This is a quarter horse here, and, you know, horses are going to have different postures depending on the breed of horse and the discipline that you want to ride in. I think the important thing to remember is that the horse's head carriage is up to you, really. The horse will carry itself where it's released. So if you want the horse to have a very high head carriage, release when it's high. If you're a Western rider and you want the horse to have a very low head carriage, release when it's low. It really is up to you. I had somebody the other day wrote to me and said that her horse is coming back behind the vertical when she's riding, and she's not sure how to fix that. And I said, well, bring your hands forward up the neck and lift the rein. And what happens then is the bit works more on the horse's lips, which is much easier, and it's much more likely to get the horse to lift its head. And indeed, that did work. But, you know, it just depends on where you want the horse's head to be, and that is where you need to release. So you need to find a way to put pressure on the horse until it changes and until it gets to that position you want it to be in. So we're just going to have a look at the second page here in the long-reining. So the common problems. Now, look, this is something that I always try and include with the training, because it's absolutely no good for you to watch me doing it well. You know, I've been doing it for a lot of years, and you're not going to learn much doing that. What I need you to know is the problems that I've had, the mistakes that I've made, so that you don't have to make those mistakes. And I think that's really important that you see those, because just by being aware of certain things before you set out, it makes it much easier for you, you know, to recognize them just before they happen. And hopefully you and your horse don't have to make that mistake. So I'm not sure what this Andalusian horse is doing. I'm not sure what the what his mistake was, and I don't want to particularly put the. I think he was actually a bit more emotional than I thought he was. I think this horse was one of those horses that is a little bit hard to judge his emotional level, and I'm sure you've all come across those. You know, some are really obvious. You know, my Frisian's really obvious. If he doesn't like something or he's unsure about something, his head is so high. Whereas this fellow, not so much. You know, he's just a little bit more difficult to tell where his emotional level was. I think once I got him going, I realised that he'd never walked on the long reins. I think that was what it was. So he'd get on the long reins and he'd go into trot. And so what I wanted him to understand was that it wasn't necessary to work that hard. And what he needed to do just was to listen and to wait for a cue to trot, and that it was okay to relax and to walk. So we're going to go back to here. Kicking at the lines. This is another really common problem. Now, you're not going to see this sort of behavior with a horse that's never seen lines before. This is a horse that's definitely seen lines before. And she was, she came from the sales, this horse. This is a day that I'm doing at a horse rescue charity. And, you know, they, of course, she came from the sales. They didn't know anything about her history. But she was really extreme with this kicking at the lines. And usually with a horse that isn't this extreme, I think it'd be a better idea to just habituate them to it. But she was quite upset about it, so we decided actually to long rein her in the end from the saddle, I think. But, you know, if you do have a horse like this that has obviously had a bad experience with lines behind them, and a lot of horses do, because people often teach youngsters to lead or to load like this, and that can be a really bad experience for a horse. So, you know, I do think where we can, to habituate the horse to this sort of feeling is a really good thing. But you must be careful, because once you start to long rein, the reins are then attached to the horse. So it's really important that you find this out before you clip those reins on and set off. Because if the horse isn't happy with that feeling of the rope behind it, then you're going to be in trouble. The horse is going to be in a lot of trouble. And the older horse, you know, is another interesting one, because I love this little horse. She was pretty sure she knew exactly what was right. And she was 20-something, I think, this little horse. I did quite a bit of work with her. And she was very sweet. You could sort of feel her thinking, though, oh, gosh, you've got it wrong again, Kate. That's not the way we do it. We do it like this. And she was interesting because she'd spent a lot of years as a trail riding horse at a holiday resort. And I think that means, you know, you put up with a lot of beginner riders. So I think life for her had been very unpredictable. So she was a very interesting horse to work with. You'll see her, I think, also in the older horse with shoulder control and give to the bit. I think she's quite an interesting horse. And I do find with horses like that they love the give to the bit work and things. They love to understand stuff. When you start explaining things, they really do appreciate that. Now I've got a little one on the equipment that I use, and this is one about rollers for long reining. And you see my lovely Frisian here. This is a vaulting roller that I found, and it's actually really beautiful to long rein with that. So can long reins be made with rope? Yes. So Callie's question there. So we'll just go back quickly to that equipment one. Now, you can certainly use rope. I find it quite hard to hold on to myself. What I usually start with is this surcingle. They're not brilliant quality. They're not expensive either, but I prefer this one, this webbing one, over the leather ones, because I find the leather ones are even poorer quality. What I don't like about these webbing ones is their buckles. And if you're doing a first saddling with a horse or first girthing with a horse with one of these, you do need to be really careful, because the buckles are quite hard to undo and they're quite difficult to do up as well. So I'm just showing you here with these rings. The top ones close to the wither are terrific for when your horse is good at long reining. So they're a more advanced thing. I start with the lower rings because then I can have one rope behind the horse. But what's worth noting is that, I'll just pause that there for a sec. What's worth noting with that is that still, even with those lower rings, that rope behind the horse is still quite high. Now, the problem with that is that when you do change direction, it's quite easy to get that rope stuck under the horse's tail. And that is bad news, really. For a lot of horses, that is very bad news. And that can be quite disturbing for them. And it's quite hard to get out from under the tail once it's there. Trust me, I have done that. So that's really another reason I prefer to long rein in the saddle. So I take the saddle, I tie the stirrups together underneath it with a bungee rope or a bit of baling twine. You need to be a bit careful with baling twine because for sensitive horses, it can rub a little bit. I have had a bit of baling twine rub on the horse's elbow once and rub this hair off a bit, which wasn't nice. So I now go to a nice soft bungee rope. So tie the stirrups together and then put the reins through from the back, and the stirrups work just to hold the reins in place, rather like the rings on the surcingle would, but they're obviously much lower. And this keeps the rein between the the tail and the hock in that nice area there where it sits quite comfortably, and you really don't run that risk of having it get jammed under the tail. So once your horse is working well, then you can go back to either the surcingle or the vaulting roller, and you can have the reins coming from up much higher. These are the ropes I use. I prefer these over ropes themselves, these lines, because they're actually quite easy to hold. You can see I have two different colors. Now, the reason I have two different colors is because for me, it's easier to say to somebody, oh, pick up the red one rather than pick up the left one. Because, by the time I've worked out which is left and right, and the handler's worked out which is left and right, nobody knows whether they're coming or going. And for you, if you're alone and long reining, then, you need to be able to see which is which in your hand as well. I like those ropes as well because you can just fit them through those rings in that surcingle. They're not easy to get through, but you can get them through, which is much less hassle than having to thread them through from the long end. So that's my preferred choice, and that's the sort of nice soft bungee I use to connect the stirrups together, just something like that, something really simple. I do try and keep it really simple. Those ropes aren't very expensive. Those long lines aren't very expensive. They don't last forever. If you use them with your saddle, they tend to fray a bit, but they are quite nice and soft to hold. So the other thing I wanted to talk to you about was one of the disadvantages of long reining. So let's just, I think there's a good picture. I'm not sure if it's on this one, but anyway, we'll just have the Palomino going around. I'd talk about the disadvantages. Now, the main disadvantage is that you haven't got the same sort of control as you do when you're teaching give to the bit or something. So what happens is with long reining, you're going to make the horse slightly heavier in the bridle. The reason is because you simply haven't got the same release. So if the horse puts its head up, comes out of frame, and you pick up pressure on that inside rein, by the time you release it, when the horse is correct, that it's got all that way to travel down the rein. Plus, just because of the weight of the rein itself, the horse is never going to get a full release. So really, you're going to make the horse slightly heavier in the bridle, long reining. The other thing is the horse is going to get some meaningless pressure, especially in canter. So if you watch this horse, I don't know if she's going to go into canter. I would like it if she went into canter. I don't think she is. Maybe she is. We'll put it forward to here. You can see the rope behind her, and especially in canter, when the outside leg is back, it does connect up to her rein. Yeah, so it pulls the rein, and so she's getting this meaningless pressure. Now, that is a disadvantage, especially when you've just, gone and made a horse that's beautifully light in the bridle. And, then you go and do this and you think, oh my goodness, I'm losing all my lightness. You're not losing all your lightness. That's the first thing, is you're not losing it. But what I would advise you to do is to practice a bit of give to the bit after you long rein. Okay, so it's a really good idea just to take the reins off and put your normal reins back on and do 5 minutes of give to the bit and say, now remember this softness. You can see it here with Louis. See how that outside rein is, tightening up and getting him a little bit every stride. Now that doesn't happen when the horse is more advanced and is no longer using the saddle. So you've got a more advanced horse that doesn't turn and face or anything like this. This is just for training. Once the horse can have the reins going from the bit to the wither, or to the high points of that surcingle or roller, then this won't happen. And I think it's a disadvantage that's worth putting up with to get this lesson taught, because it is such a useful lesson. But it is something to be aware of. It's long reining, especially in the saddle, is a great tool for a horse that's been off work or a horse that you're just starting under saddle. But you don't want to use it a lot, not like this, for a horse that's already going well and is nice and soft in the bridle. So that is worth remembering. And that really is the main disadvantage I can think of. The other one is that you don't have really any shoulder control with long reining. So let's say you're, going around in a circle with the long reins and your horse falls in. The only thing you can do, if it falls in, it's making the circle smaller. The only thing you can do is pick up the outside rein, bend the horse to the outside and move it to the outside. So, you haven't got any reverse arc because you can't move the reins. So that's a bit of a disadvantage as well. So I mainly use long reining for starting under saddle and for a horse that's been off for a while. So having a look at the horse, and working out whether this is something I want to ride or I can ride or I want to ride. And I think those are the main reasons for using long reining. It's certainly what I use it for. Oh, red for right. Yeah, absolutely. I always say to people when I teach them to long rein, I say you put the red one on the right. Yeah. And I also tell them it's my only superstitious thing, which is so untrue. And if you haven't got a red one, then you put the lighter color on the right. And I say this and people go, oh, it's ridiculous, Kate. But I've never had a long reining accident. I've never seen anyone have a long reining accident or a terrible time using that red on the right or light color on the right. And whenever I see these people again afterwards, they're always, I can see them red on the right. They're always doing it like that. So yeah, it's one of those silly little things that I instill in people for no reason whatsoever. But don't forget that red on the right. Anyway, so that is it on long reining today. And I hope to see you next week. Next week, we're also on Tuesday. So go along to the webinars page and register for next week's. And thank you very much for coming, especially you Americans in the snow and everything. And just think of me in sunny Queensland. I'll see you next week. Bye.